Dragon Ball, Krillin is the man who stands beside monsters. He is the one who survived Frieza's massacre while screaming at the sky. He is the one who trained in chambers that simulated gravity so extreme it would liquefy a normal human skeleton. He is the one who fought alongside gods, angels, and creatures from erased universes, and came home. In Dragon Ball, Krillin is the background fighter, the reliable one, the punchline some fans reach for when they want to underestimate someone, but that framing only works inside a universe built on infinite escalation. Drop him somewhere else entirely, and the calculus changes, violently. My Hero Academia is a world of extraordinary people. It is a civilization restructured around a single biological miracle, the quirk. Roughly 80% of the global population carries one. The remaining 20%, the quirkless, are quietly considered lesser, broken, unfortunate. The entire society has been rebuilt around this division. Heroes with gifts, villains who abuse them, and ordinary people caught between both. It is a world that has learned to worship visible power, a world that has built licensing boards, ranking systems, celebrity agencies, and elite academies around the assumption that strength wears a face you can recognize, a world completely unprepared for what it cannot classify. Krillin walks into that world looking like nothing. He is short, he is bald, his face is calm, not the practiced calm of someone performing confidence, but the deep, weathered calm of someone who has already seen the worst the universe can offer and chose to keep going anyway. There is no visible quirk signature, no dramatic energy discharge, no costume, no agency, no license, no rank. Every sensor built by a society obsessed with measuring power would scan him and return something close to zero. Every hero trained to read a threat, each by its surface would look past him. And that would be the single most dangerous mistake this world ever made. Because Krillin does not carry his lethality where you can see it. He carries it in his fingertips, in his footwork, in the space between a villain's attack and the counter that lands before the villain even finishes the motion. He carries it in ki, a form of energy this world has no word for, no framework to understand, and no defense against. He carries it in techniques refined across decades of survival, in conflicts so large they reshaped the fabric of reality. The destructo disc, the solar flare, aerial movement, speed that makes the fastest pro-heroes look like they are standing still, precision that turns a battlefield into a chess problem he has already solved. Here is what makes this terrifying. It is not the power gap. Power gaps exist in every crossover thought experiment, and audiences have seen those debates 1,000 times. What makes Krillin's arrival in My Hero Academia genuinely unsettling is the restraint. Krillin is not reckless, he is not prideful, he is not hungry for recognition or burning for dominance. He is a man who learned, through loss, through grief, through watching people he loved die because someone hesitated at the wrong moment. That power without control is just another kind of disaster. He would not want to break this world, but this world would not give him the choice to stay small. And that is what no hero, no villain, no institution in Japan would be ready for. Not the strength, the judgment. A man this dangerous, this disciplined, this quietly aware of everything happening in a 30-meter radius while somehow still choosing de-escalation first. That man does not fit into a ranking system. He does not fit into a celebrity PR cycle. He does not fit into the tidy binary of hero versus villain that keeps this entire civilization functioning. He is something older, something the quirk era never had to account for. A veteran of a harder world wearing the face of an ordinary person. If you want to understand what truly breaks My Hero Academia, not physically but philosophically, it is not a villain with an overwhelming quirk or a catastrophe with no solution. It is a humble, cooperative, slightly confused bald man from another dimension whose worst technique could slice a mountain in half and who would still stop to make sure every civilian was behind cover before he used it. That contrast between what he appears to be and what he actually is the fault line this video is going to open up completely. And if you want more of these deep crossover breakdowns, subscribe right now, because this one goes places the obvious picks never could. Because the real question was never whether Krillin is stronger than this world. The real question, the one that keeps building across every chapter that follows, is what kind of world remains once a man shaped by harder truths enters a civilization built on comfortable ones? And what happens the moment both sides are forced to stop pretending the gap between them does not exist? To understand why Krillin's arrival in My Hero Academia is so disruptive, you first have to stop thinking about him the way Dragon Ball fans have been trained to think about him. Forget the comparisons to Goku. Forget the power ceiling debates against Saiyans and gods of destruction. That framing was always the wrong lens. Krillin was never meant to compete with beings who reshape galaxies with a sneeze. He was meant to survive them, and survive alongside them, and keep functioning at elite level while standing in their shadow. That is a completely different skill set. And it is precisely that skill set, not raw output, that makes him catastrophically misplaced in a world where the strongest fighters alive are operating at a fraction of the scale he considers Tuesday. His real profile reads like this. He began training under Master Roshi as a child, in a martial arts tradition that predates the Dragon Ball Power Arms race by generations. He learned to read ki before he learned to project it. He built combat intelligence across enemies ranging from street-level criminals to galactic conquerors to literal gods. He survived the destruction of his home planet's moon. He survived Namek's collapse. He survived the Cell Games and the Buu Saga and the Tournament of Power, events that casually erased entire timelines from existence. He did all of this not because he was the strongest person in the room, but because he was smart enough, precise enough, and emotionally disciplined enough to still be standing when the dust cleared. That survival record, alone, is worth more than any power reading. Here is what My Hero Academia's power ecosystem actually looks like from the outside. Most heroes are specialists. Their quirks grant them one dominant ability, a specific elemental output, a physical enhancement, a transformation, and their entire combat career is built around maximizing that one gift. Close-range fundamentals are often underdeveloped because heroes learn to lead with their quirk and follow with their quirk and finish with their quirk. Mobility exists, but it is tied to ability rather than pure physical mastery. Reaction speeds among even the most elite pro heroes, while impressive by any real-world standard, are operating well below what Krillin considers a warm-up threshold. The entire combat culture of this world is built vertically around a single variable. Krillin operates on an entirely different architecture. The insertion premise is straightforward. No dramatic dimensional explosion, no chaos-filled portal. Krillin appears near Musutafu in the early UA era. Quiet, cooperative, and deeply confused about where he is and how he got there. His first interaction is with local police, who attempt a routine quirk registration scan. The scanner returns nothing coherent. The energy profile the machines detect does not match any cataloged quirk category. It is not emitter type, not transformation type, not mutation type. The biological readings are irregular in ways no technician has seen before. The officer running the scan looks at the data, then at the calm, slightly puzzled bald man sitting across from him, and makes a note that this case needs to go several levels above his pay grade, immediately. The Hero Commission receives the report within hours. Their initial assessment is cautious but not alarmed. An unregistered individual with anomalous biological signatures is unusual but not unprecedented. What makes the file strange is the movement data captured incidentally by municipal cameras during Krillin's initial walk through the city. His pace looks normal, his posture looks relaxed, but the footage, when analyzed frame by frame, shows micro-adjustments in his movement, split-second weight shifts, spatial awareness responses to threats he would not have been able to perceive, that do not match any known quirk profile in the database. He had sensed a pickpocket in a crowd 30 meters behind him and angled half a step before the attempt even started. Casually, without looking, like breathing. UA staff become aware of the case through back channels. Aizawa reviews the footage personally and goes quiet in a way that his colleagues recognize. It is not the quiet of someone unimpressed. It is the quiet of someone doing very rapid and very unpleasant mental arithmetic. He watches the 30-meter Kai sense adjustment 3 times. Then he watches Krillin's hands during a brief moment when a nearby vehicle backfires loudly, and notices that Krillin does not flinch. Not suppressed flinching. Genuine, total absence of alarm. The body language of someone whose threat calibration is set so far above a car backfire that it does not even register as stimulus. Aizawa closes the file and requests a direct meeting. All Might's reaction, when he eventually views the same footage, is entirely different. He does not perform the rapid threat assessment calculus that Aizawa does. He watches the whole clip once, then watches the moment Krillin pauses in the street to help an elderly woman whose groceries had spilled, taking careful, measured time to sort every item back into her bag before continuing, and something in All Might's expression shifts. Not alarm, recognition. The specific bone-deep recognition of someone who has met this type of person before, someone who carries enormous capacity for destruction and buries it completely beneath the instinct to protect. And the most dangerous part was not that Krillin could overpower this world. It was that unlike most men who arrive carrying that kind of power, he would spend every available moment trying not to use it. That restraint, that quiet, genuine preference for peace over demonstration, was not weakness. It was the signature of someone who understood exactly what unleashing looked like. Someone who had watched people he loved die in conflicts where the violence came too late or too much, or in the wrong direction. Someone who had learned in the most painful way possible that power is not the problem. Knowing when to stop is. And this world, for all its heroes, had never truly been taught that lesson yet. The first real incident happens 11 days after Krillin's arrival. It is not planned. It is not staged. It is a villain attack in the Hosu district. 3 mid-tier criminals with combat-type quirks hitting a commercial street during peak afternoon hours. The kind of chaotic smash and grab that pro heroes respond to within minutes. 2 heroes are already on scene when Krillin rounds the corner from a side street, drawn not by sound but by something no one in this world would understand if he tried to explain it. He felt the hostility before the screaming started, felt the spike in aggressive intent like a change in air pressure. He was already moving before the first explosion hit the storefront glass, adjusting his route, cataloging threats, and calculating civilian positions. All of it happening behind a face that looked almost bored. What the 2 on-scene heroes witness in the next 40 seconds will take them considerably longer to process. The first villain, Quirk, hardened stone skin, resistant to conventional impact, goes down before either hero can reposition. Krillin does not punch through the stone. He does not try. He moves inside the guard completely, finds the one pressure point the hardening cannot reach, and applies force so targeted and precise that the man crumples without the skin ever needing to break. The second villain, an emitter type who generates pressurized air bursts, fires twice. Krillin is not where either burst lands. He was already behind the villain by the time the second one discharged, and the takedown happens before the villain's arms finish their follow-through motion. Clean, silent, economical. The third villain is smarter and pulls a hostage. A civilian woman, arm-locked, using her as a body shield while backing toward a side alley. In the standard playbook, this is where negotiations begin and heroes reposition for angles. Krillin looks at the scene for approximately 1 second. Then he uses a solar flare, a concentrated burst of blinding light that he produces with so little visible effort that both on-scene heroes initially assume something in the environment exploded. In the half-second the villain spends blinded and flinching, Krillin has crossed the distance, removed the woman from the hold with 0 impact force on her body, set her gently behind him, and put the villain face down on the pavement. He checks the woman for injuries before he checks whether the villain is still conscious. The whole sequence, start to finish, takes less time than it takes either watching hero to reach for their communicator. The news coverage that evening is chaotic in the specific way that things become chaotic when institutions do not have the language to describe what they witnessed. The camera footage from a nearby traffic system captures most of the takedown sequence, and the clip circulates within hours. The framing fractures immediately across different narratives. One outlet runs it under the headline, "Unknown Vigilante Intervenes in Hosu Incident," which is technically accurate and almost entirely misleading. A second outlet focuses on the solar flare and speculates about a powerful light emission quirk, comparing it to existing cataloged abilities and finding the comparison strained. A third outlet skips the power analysis entirely and focuses on the part of the footage where Krillin checks the hostage's injuries, describing it as unusually methodical for a street-level intervention. That framing is the most honest, and it gets the fewest views. Aizawa watches the footage with his erasure active as a personal experiment, testing his own threat instinct rather than planning any particular action. What he notices is not the technique, it is the economy. Every movement Krillin makes in that clip is the minimum required to produce the desired outcome. There is no excess, no style, no performance. In a world where heroes have been unconsciously trained to fight with an audience in mind, where the visual impact of a quirk is as important commercially as its effectiveness, Krillin's combat behavior looks almost alien. He does not fight like a man who needs anyone to understand what he just did. He fights like a man who only cares that it worked. Aizawa finds this simultaneously the most professional and most unsettling thing he has seen in years. Midoriya gets the footage from Ida, who got it from a UA news aggregator and watches it 17 times in one evening. His notebook comes out. The handwriting gets dense and slightly frantic in the way it does when Izuku Midoriya encounters something that does not fit his existing models, but demands to fit somewhere. He writes and crosses out quirk type 3 times. He circles movement pattern and draws 17 arrows from it. He writes restraint, intentional, with a question mark so large it takes up a third of the page. Then he writes underneath it, in smaller, slower letters, the thing that will stay with him for the years. The rest of this story. He could have ended all 3 faster. He chose not to. He stares at that line for a long time before closing the notebook. Bakugo sees the clip once, says nothing, and goes to the gym. He trains for 2 hours longer than scheduled. He does not tell anyone why. But the training he chooses that night is not his usual explosive output work. It is footwork. Pure footwork. Drilled alone in the empty room, replaying in his head a movement sequence he watched on a 5-inch phone screen and could not follow at full speed even knowing it was coming. Katsuki Bakugo does not admit to being impressed by anyone easily. He does not admit it now. But the gym session runs 40 minutes past midnight, and that is its own kind of answer. The League of Villains received the same footage through their own channels, analyzed by Kurogiri with the careful, systematic attention he gives to anything that might represent a variable. His assessment, delivered quietly to Shigaraki, was simple and deeply uncomfortable. The individual in the clip had not used a quirk. He was increasingly certain of this. Whatever energy the solar flare represented, it did not behave like a quirk. It did not have the signature biological markers their intelligence contacts could usually identify, which meant either this person had found a way to conceal their quirk so thoroughly that it registered as non-existent, or they were operating on something else entirely, something the League had no framework for. Shigaraki scratched his neck and said they would wait and learn more, but the unease in the room did not leave with the conversation. Because the League had prepared for heroes with quirks. They had prepared for brute force, for legal authority, for symbolic figures, for public opinion. They had war-gamed nearly every variable the hero society could produce, but they were not prepared for a man whose body moved like pure instinct, whose mind processed a battlefield like a veteran from a different war, and whose lightest techniques could rewrite the outcome of any engagement before the other side realized the engagement had begun. The variable had arrived, and nobody, not heroes, not villains, not institutions, had yet understood how permanent that arrival was about to become. UA's decision to bring Krillin into a supervised training observation session is framed officially as a safety assessment. Unofficially, it is every senior staff member trying to answer the same question in a controlled environment. What exactly are they dealing with? The session is held in ground beta, with 5 members of Class 1A present as passive observers and Aizawa on site with erasure ready as a precaution he already suspects will be useless but maintains anyway out of professional habit. Krillin arrives on time, dressed in plain clothes, carrying no equipment, and spends the first 3 minutes before the session begins asking Aizawa polite questions about the facility layout. Not tactical questions, genuine curiosity. The kind of casual spatial awareness that most people do not register as dangerous until much later. Aizawa activates erasure the moment the session begins. He holds it for 45 seconds, watching Krillin's behavior for any sign of disruption. The usual tells when a quirk gets cut, the flicker of confusion or sudden loss of control. Nothing changes. Krillin's posture remains the same. His breathing remains the same. The energy Aizawa cannot name but has begun to feel at the edge odd. His perception, a pressure that is not physical but somehow registers like weight, does not waver at all. Aizawa deactivates erasure, makes a single note in his assessment file, and does not share it with anyone in the room. The note reads, "Erasure is irrelevant here." He underlines it once and moves forward. The 5 observing students each process the training session through their own lens, and each lens reveals something different about Krillin. Ida watches the footwork with the focused reverence of someone who has dedicated his life to movement as a discipline, and he recognizes, with a humility that costs him something, that what he is seeing is a mastery of spatial control that his quirk-dependent speed has never demanded he develop organically. Todoroki watches Krillin run a solo movement drill across the training ground and finds himself struck not by the speed, which is extraordinary, but by the absence of internal conflict in every motion. Here is a man with great power who does not seem to be fighting himself to use it. Todoroki does not look away for the entirety of the drill. Midoriya fills 4 pages of notebook in the first 20 minutes. His analysis is not wrong, but it is beautifully incomplete in the way that happens when a brilliant mind encounters something that outpaces its current vocabulary. He identifies the movement economy correctly. He identifies the sensory awareness. He writes "key" with a question mark, and then 3 pages later writes it again without the question mark, as if somewhere between observations he quietly decided. What he cannot fully articulate, but what he feels building in his chest like something important, is the realization that Krillin's power did not come from a gift. It was not inherited, not accidental, not unlocked by circumstance or dramatic breakthrough. It was built, piece by piece, fight by fight, loss by loss, over decades of deliberate and costly practice. For Izuku Midoriya, who has spent his entire life trying to prove that the absence of a natural gift does not determine a person's ceiling, that realization does not land quietly. Bakugo lasts 11 minutes before he requests permission to spar. Aizawa denies it. Bakugo requests again with marginally more formal phrasing. Aizawa denies it again, this time with a look that ends the conversation. What nobody in the room acknowledges out loud is that Bakugo's frustration is not aggression. Or not only aggression. It is the specific, grinding discomfort of a person who has organized their entire identity around being the most dangerous presence in any room, suddenly sharing a room with someone who has never once needed to organize their identity around anything. Krillin, for his part, notices Bakugo's energy immediately. He says nothing. He simply, briefly, makes eye contact, calm and without challenge, and then returns to the drill. That single moment of non-reaction unsettles Bakugo more than any confrontation could have. Outside UA's walls, the Hero Commission's internal response to Krillin's presence is moving through several stages simultaneously, and none of them are comfortable. The licensing board has opened 3 separate consultation threads trying to determine what category Krillin would fall under if he agreed to formal registration. Combat type is the obvious surface answer, but the energy signature problem refuses to resolve. Support item fraud has been ruled out. There are no items. Mutation type has been proposed and rejected because his biology reads as baseline human in every test except the ones involving whatever key is, which is every test that actually matters. Ellie matters. The Commission's most senior analyst submits a private memo suggesting they stop trying to classify Krillin within existing categories and start building a new one. The memo sits unread for 6 days because nobody wants to admit that is the correct answer. The implications ripple outward faster than anyone manages. Top-ranked heroes begin making quiet inquiries through back channels. Not hostile, not official, just the careful intelligence gathering of people whose professional position depends on understanding every significant power variable in their jurisdiction. Endeavor's agency notes the footage and files it. Hawks reviews the clip with the particular attention of someone whose entire value to the Commission is built on being the fastest and most information-efficient hero alive, and sits with the uncomfortable awareness that the person in the footage would have completed every tactical objective Hawks was proud of and done it with less movement. He does not file a report. He thinks for a while instead. The real fracture, though, the one that the Commission has not fully named yet but is beginning to feel, is philosophical rather than practical. My Hero Academia's entire institutional framework is built on a foundational assumption that power comes from biology, that the gift precedes the greatness, that the system needs to manage, license, and regulate powers because powers are fundamentally unchosen, and unchosen forces require external governance. Krillin's existence quietly destroys that assumption from the ground up. His power is not unchosen. It is not biological accident. It is not a quirk to be regulated because it was never a quirk to begin with. It is something the system has no procedure for. Earned capacity, accumulated through will and loss and decades of survival. And the system's discomfort with that fact is growing at exactly the same rate as its understanding of how strong he actually is. And for the first time, the world of My Hero Academia would face a power more disturbing than villainy itself. Controlled, moral, disciplined lethality, wearing the face of a cooperative stranger who kept asking where he could find a good place for lunch. The attack comes on a Thursday. It is coordinated in a way that the League of Villains has never managed before. Not because their planning has improved, but because someone above Shigaraki has decided that the Krillin variable cannot be allowed to continue floating loose in the hero ecosystem. All. For one does not make decisions out of fear. He makes them out of architecture. He builds the future by removing the pieces that do not fit his design. And a cooperative, unregistered, unclassifiable fighter with no institutional loyalty and no visible ceiling is precisely the kind of piece that his design cannot afford to leave unsecured. The attack on Central Musutafu is not meant to win a battle. It is meant to force a reveal, to make Krillin show everything, in public, under pressure, so that All for One can finally read the full blueprint of what he is dealing with. 4 simultaneous strike points. The coordination is surgical: commercial district, hospital perimeter, a transport junction, and the outer edge of the UA evacuation route. Hero response fractures across vectors immediately. Communication channels flood. Dispatch cannot prioritize fast enough. The most damaging element is not the villains themselves, but the cascading civilian panic that the simultaneous nature of the attack produces. Multiple emergencies pulling response capacity in directions that leave each individual site undersupported. Pro-heroes are moving, making the right calls, doing what they are trained to do. But trained responses to a quirk-based society's worst-case scenario were not designed around an opponent who understood, from long experience, exactly how to make a coordinated defense collapse under its own weight. The battlefield is already tilting before Krillin arrives at the first site. He does not announce himself. There is no dramatic entrance. One moment the commercial district strike point is a deteriorating scene of 3 overwhelmed heroes managing 8 villains, and a cascade of structural damage threatening 2 adjacent buildings. And then something changes in the air pressure, and Krillin is simply present. Not arrived. Present. As if the space rearranged itself slightly to accommodate someone who had already read the entire situation from a block away and walked into exactly the correct position before anyone registered his approach. The 3 overwhelmed heroes notice him for the first time when he is already between them and the largest threat. Hands loose at his sides, expression focused, key sense painting the entire site in information that no camera, no scanner, and no quirk in this world could replicate. What follows is not a fight in any sense this world's heroes recognize. It is a systematic disassembly. Krillin moves through the 8-villain formation the way a current moves through still water. Not crashing, not forcing, but finding every path of least resistance and taking it at a speed that turns the entire engagement into a series of fait accompli moments where the villains are already handled before anyone on the hero side has processed that he moved. 2 disabled in the first 4 seconds, 3 more in the next 6. One emitter type manages to discharge a large-scale area attack, genuinely dangerous, legitimately threatening to everyone in range. And Krillin redirects his own momentum sideways in midair to let it pass, then continues the sequence without breaking stride. The watching heroes will describe this moment differently to different people for years afterward, but they will all use the same word for the feeling it produced: wrong. not threatening wrong, physics wrong, reality briefly disagreeing with itself wrong. The moral crisis arrives at the seventh villain. He is using a hostage, a child, no older than 8, terrified beyond coherence, as both shield and leverage, backed against a damaged wall with a quirk that generates localized gravitational collapse. Small radius, but within that radius, lethal. The child is inside the radius. The villain is screaming terms that nobody is meeting because the terms are incoherent and the situation is deteriorating in real time. Every hero on site is calculating angles, calculating risk, calculating the legal and ethical boundaries of intervention. It is what they are trained to do. It is the right process. It simply operates at a speed that the situation is outpacing. Krillin looks at the scene for 1 breath, 2, and in those 2 breaths, he is running a calculation that none of these heroes have the context to understand. The calculation of someone who has watched hesitation cost everything in conflicts where the stakes were planetary against opponents who did not pause. He does not use the Destructo disc. He chooses not to. And that choice, visible only in the quarter-second delay before he moves, is one of the most important things that happens in this entire event, though nobody watching will understand it until much later. What he uses instead is speed so complete that the villain's perception simply does not register his presence until the child is already behind the hero line, and the gravitational collapse is discharging into empty air. The villain looks down at his now empty arms with an expression of genuine, uncomprehending confusion. Krillin is 4 meters away, setting the child down gently, checking for injury, and already tracking the 8th villain's position with his Kai sense without turning around. The heroes on site stand very still for a moment, not from tactical consideration, from the specific, ancient animal stillness of organisms that have just watched something move faster than their threat detection was designed to process. The Commission's field coordinator, monitoring via live feed from the emergency response hub, quietly removes her headset and sets it on the desk. On her screen, the 8th villain is down. All 4 strike points are being resolved. The cascading emergency that was designed to overwhelm hero response capacity has been interrupted. Not defeated in a climactic confrontation, but methodically, almost bureaucratically, taken apart at its joints by a single individual moving between sites with a speed that the tracking systems keep losing and reacquiring. She watches the timestamp data on the site resolutions. The margin between them is small enough that she checks it twice, assuming instrument error. It is not instrument error. She picks her headset back up, patches through to her senior director, and says 3 words before the director can speak. "We have a problem." The director, watching the same feed, says nothing for a long moment. Then, "Or a solution." Neither of them sounds certain which one is correct. The moment that every hero who is present at any of the 4 sites will carry with them, the moment that gets replayed in their minds at strange hours for a long time afterward, is not the speed or the precision or even the choice not to use the Destructo disc when using it would have been faster and safer and arguably justified. The moment is what Krillin does when the last villain is secured and the immediate emergency is resolved. He sits down on the curb at the commercial district site. He puts his head in his hands, not in distress, not in collapse, but in the deliberate, practiced way of someone performing a specific internal check, taking inventory, cataloging, making sure that in the process of handling this world's worst day, he had not made choices he could not account for. The heroes watching him do this will not have the vocabulary to name what they are seeing. But what they are seeing is a man who holds himself to a standard of accountability for his own power that most of this world's heroes have never been asked to meet. In that moment, every hero watching understood the same terrible thing. The safest man on the battlefield had also been the deadliest, and he knew it better than any of them. The public response fractures along fault lines that have always existed in hero society but rarely had a single event to crystallize around. Within 48 hours of the Musutafu incident, the footage, compiled from municipal cameras, civilian phones, and hero agency body feeds, has been viewed more times than any hero engagement in recent memory. The comment sections divide with a speed and certainty that suggests people were already carrying these arguments before the footage gave them a reason to use them. One camp wants Krillin licensed, ranked, and integrated into the official hero system immediately. Not suggested, demanded, with a specific urge and energy that speaks to how thoroughly the incident exposed the gap between what the current system can handle and what the world actually requires. The other camp is quieter, more institutional, and considerably more frightened. The Hero Commission convenes an emergency internal session that is officially classified as a routine review. Everyone in the room knows it is not routine. The language in the preliminary documents is careful, measured in the deliberate way that language becomes measured when the people choosing the words are aware that the wrong framing could produce consequences they cannot manage. The core problem is structural. If they license Krillin, they are implicitly acknowledging that their classification system has a category it never built: earned power, non-biological capacity, a strength that exists entirely outside quirk governance. If they do not license him, they are acknowledging that an individual operating at his level can function in their jurisdiction without their authority meaning anything. Both options are uncomfortable. The commission adjourns without a resolution and reconvenes twice more that week with the same result. All Might requests a private meeting with Krillin 3 days after the incident, and Krillin agrees without hesitation or condition. The meeting happens in a small room in a UA administrative building with no other staff present and no official record. What passes between them is not fully known. What is observed by a junior faculty member who briefly enters the adjacent hallway and hears the tone, if not the content, is that the conversation runs long, involves significant silence on both sides, and ends with All Might standing at the door looking like a man who has been handed something heavy and is still deciding how to carry it. He describes the meeting to no one, but in subsequent weeks his interactions with Class 1A carry a particular weight when he discusses the relationship between inherited power and developed character, a distinction he had always honored but never perhaps fully examined against a living example this clear. Midoriya processes the aftermath the way he processes everything that matters, obsessively, privately, and with a depth of feeling that his notebook can only partially contain. What the Musutafu incident gave him was not inspiration in the simple electric sense. It was something more complicated and more lasting, a reorientation. Krillin had not been born with power, had not been chosen by power, had not received power through sacrifice or fate or cosmic alignment. He had assembled it, across years of failure and loss and deliberate grinding, often terrifying recommitment to becoming better than he was yesterday. For Midoriya, who had staked his entire identity on the belief that quirklessness was not destiny, seeing that belief embodied in a person who operated entirely outside the quirk system was not merely motivating, it was the closest thing to proof he had ever encountered. He writes 6 pages that night and does not share them with anyone. Bakugo's confrontation with what the incident means for him takes longer and happens more quietly than anyone who knows him would predict. He does not talk about it. He does not perform a dramatic recalibration. What changes is subtler, a slight but consistent shift in how he approaches the question of strength, not softer. Bakugo does not become soft, but the specific flavor of his competitive drive begins modulating away from the need to be visibly, undeniably, publicly dominant, and towards something that looks, from certain angles, like the beginning of genuine craft. He still wants to win. He will always want to win. But the Musutafu footage introduced a nagging, persistent question into his internal monologue that he cannot fully silence. What exactly does winning mean if the standard you are measuring yourself against was built by a man this world had never seen before? Krillin, for his part, declines every official offer the commission sends in the weeks following. Not rudely, not with the dramatic refusal of someone making a statement. He declines in the same tone he uses for everything. Calm, cooperative, slightly apologetic, entirely unmovable. He does not want a rank. He does not want an agency. He does not want his face on a billboard or his quirk cataloged in a database or his capabilities assessed in a controlled environment for institutional comfort. He offers something else instead: availability. If there is a situation that the ranked system cannot handle, he will come. If there are students who want to understand a different philosophy of combat and discipline, he will talk. He will not be owned by this world's systems, but he will not abandon its people either. That boundary, drawn so simply and held so completely, produces more institutional discomfort than his combat record does. The students of Class 1A carry the experience forward in ways that reshape them without any single dramatic lesson being delivered. They were not told to learn from Krillin. They were not assigned him as a mentor or model. They simply witnessed someone operating at a level they had no framework for, and found that the witnessing alone was permanently instructive. Ida revisits his approach to movement discipline. Todoroki begins examining the relationship between his power and his identity with a new and somewhat unsettling honesty. Uraraka, who had not been present at any of the incident sites but watched every clip of footage available, writes in her own journal something that is less analytical than Midoriya's notes and more simply human. He looked tired afterward, not from the fight, from caring that much. She reads it back and decides it is the most important thing she has written all year. Because if Krillin's arrival in the My Hero Academia universe proved anything permanent, it was not that he was stronger than this world, though he was. It was not that hero society was fragile, though the incident revealed exactly where the cracks ran. It was something quieter, and in the long run, considerably more destabilizing to every comfortable assumption this civilization had built itself upon. True power does not always announce itself. True courage does not always need to be seen. And a man shaped by harder truths, carrying losses this world's heroes had never been asked to bear, choosing restraint not because he was constrained but because he had already counted the cost of the alternative. That man does not merely overpower a world, he changes what the world believes power is supposed to look like. And that change, once it enters a civilization's understanding, does not leave. Hero society does not break loudly. That is the part that catches people off guard every time. The assumption, built into every disaster simulation and every villain threat assessment, is that collapse arrives as an event, a singular catastrophic moment that everyone can point to afterward and say, "There, that is where it changed." But the fracture that Krillin's presence introduces into My Hero Academia's institutional foundation does not arrive as an event. It arrives as a question. A single, persistent, load-bearing question that the system was never designed to answer and cannot stop being asked. If power can be earned rather than given, if genuine combat mastery can exist completely outside biological inheritance, then what precisely is the quirk licensing system actually governing? Not power, not safety, something else, something the Commission does not want named. The first public intellectual to name it is not a hero academic or a licensing board analyst. She is a journalist, mid-career, moderately well-known, with a reputation for asking the specific questions that hero agencies prefer remain theoretical. Her piece runs in a national publication 17 days after the Musutafu incident, under a headline so carefully worded that its implications take a second reading to fully land. The argument she makes is not that the licensing system is corrupt. She is too careful for that, and also too accurate. Corruption is the wrong diagnosis. The argument she makes is that the licensing system was built to manage a specific type of power, and that type of power was always assumed to be the only type that existed. Krillin's documented performance at 4 simultaneous incident sites does not just strain that assumption, it falsifies it. The system is not broken, it is simply revealed to have always been incomplete. The response from established hero agencies is swift and follows a predictable architecture. Official statements emphasizing the importance of registered, legally accountable heroism. Background briefings to sympathetic outlets suggesting that unregistered operatives, however well-intentioned, represent a structural risk to coordinated emergency response. Carefully worded endorsements from ranked heroes, none of whom are willing to say directly that Krillin should be controlled, but all of whom manage to imply, indirectly, that the current situation is unsustainable. The machinery of institutional self-preservation operates with the smooth efficiency of something that has had a long time to practice. What it cannot fully suppress is the fact that the 4 incident sites were resolved faster and more completely than the official response would have managed alone. That fact sits in every statement like a splinter nobody can extract. Among the top 10 ranked heroes, the internal conversations are more honest than the public ones, and considerably less comfortable. The ranking system, the annual assessment that determines hero order, resource allocation, public trust, and commercial viability, has always operated on the implicit assumption that the top of the list represents something real, the best, the strongest, the most capable. Those assumptions have survived considerable stress over the years, but they have survived because every challenge to them came from within the same framework. A hero with a stronger quirk, a better strategy, a more comprehensive skill set. Krillin does not challenge the ranking from within the framework. He stands entirely outside it, demonstrably capable of operating at a level that makes the framework's internal hierarchies look like an argument about deck chair arrangement. The heroes who understand this say nothing publicly, but they train harder that month than they have in years. The underground combat community, the network of illegal fighting circuits, black market quirk traders, and unlicensed operators who exist in the permanent shadow of hero society, processes Krillin's arrival with a different kind of intelligence. Where institutions see a classification problem, the underground sees a threat profile. Where the Commission sees an unregistered variable, the underground sees something simpler and more alarming. A fighter who cannot be surprised, cannot be outmaneuvered at speed, cannot be psychologically manipulated through any of the standard underground playbooks, and who does not appear to have exploitable emotional pressure points in the conventional sense. The underground's best intelligence analysts spend 3 weeks building a threat assessment and produce a document that nobody who reads it finds comforting. The recommended response is not engagement, it is avoidance, complete, permanent, categorical avoidance. This recommendation is taken seriously because the people making it are not cautious by nature. Shigaraki receives his own briefing and responds to it in his characteristic way, with visible irritation, and underneath the irritation, a calculation that runs colder and deeper than the surface emotion suggests. The League does not have a counter-Krillin strategy. This is not for lack of intelligence or lack of will. It is for the same reason that no one in this world has a counter-Krillin strategy, because the variables required to build one include speed, sensory range, endurance, and combat IQ figures that simply do not exist in any other active fighter on the board. You cannot plan around an opponent you cannot model. The best Shigaraki can do is note that Krillin appears to have personal limits. He avoids lethality. He prioritizes civilians. He functions within a moral framework that creates predictable constraints. Those constraints are not weaknesses exactly, but they are edges, places where the math of what he will do becomes, if not exploitable, at least less infinite. Shigaraki files this understanding away and changes the subject. The calculation underneath does not change subjects. It runs continuously, quietly, in the permanent background of everything the League does afterward. The most unexpected reaction comes from the quirkless community, the quiet, often invisible population that Hero Society has never quite known how to address. Not victims, officially, not a protected class, precisely, just the roughly 20% of the population for whom the biological lottery came up empty, in a world that reorganized its entire value system around biological gifts. The emergence of a figure who operates at hero level, genuinely, demonstrably, catastrophically at hero level, through a pathway that does not involve biology at all, produces in this community something that does not have a clean name. Not hope, exactly. Hope implies a future that is not yet present. What it produces is closer to retrospective justification. A quiet, fierce, collective recognition that the framework was always wrong. That the absence of a quirk was never the thing it was said to be. Krillin does not speak to this community. He does not seek to represent them or position himself as their symbol. But the symbol attaches anyway, with the irresistible gravity of a story that a large number of people needed to exist. And the city moves forward in the particular way that cities move forward when something has shifted, but the shifting has not yet fully resolved, with surface normalcy and underground turbulence, with official statements and private anxieties, with a ranking board that still publishes its annual list, and a public that reads it with a new and slightly different eye. The question the journalist named is not answered. It is not answered because answering it honestly would require the system to rebuild the assumptions it was founded on, and systems do not do that voluntarily. They do it when they are forced to, and the forcing had not yet fully arrived, but Krillin was still here, still present, still available, on his own terms, without institutional sanctio. or social performance. Still the same quiet, cooperative, impossibly capable man who had declined every title the world offered him. Still the single most unsettling presence in a civilization that believed it understood what dangerous looked like. And the question kept being asked, in press rooms and training halls and underground briefings and quirkless community centers, by people with entirely different stakes and entirely different vocabularies, arriving at the same impossible conclusion from a dozen different directions. It begins informally, the way most important things begin, not with ceremony or official sanction, but with a question asked in the wrong hallway at the right moment. Midoriya is leaving a late training session when he finds Krillin sitting outside the ground beta entrance, watching the city lights with the specific quality of stillness that Izuku has begun to recognize as active rather than passive. The stillness of someone processing large amounts of information through senses that do not require eyes or ears to operate. He almost walks past. Then he stops, because the notebook in his bag has 17 unanswered questions with Krillin's name beside them, and the person who could answer them is sitting 3 meters away looking like he has nowhere better to be. Midoriya sits down. Krillin glances over. Neither of them speaks for a moment. Then Krillin says, "You want to ask something." It is not a question. What follows is not a lesson in the formal sense. Krillin does not adopt the role of teacher with any enthusiasm. He deflects the framing each time Midoriya tries to apply it, with a gentle persistence that suggests the deflection comes from genuine belief rather than modesty. He does not think of himself as someone with answers to give. He thinks of himself as someone who has survived long enough to accumulate a specific set of expenses. 5 mistakes, and the transmission of those mistakes to someone willing to learn from them is not teaching so much as it is basic efficiency. Why should Midoriya pay the same costs Krillin already paid if the information is available? That logic, practical, unsentimental, quietly generous, is more instructive than anything that follows from it. Midoriya writes it down verbatim and draws a box around it. The first thing Krillin talks about, unprompted and at length, is fear. Not the management of fear, or the suppression of fear, or the performance of fearlessness that hero culture tends to reward publicly. The relationship with fear. He describes fighting alongside people whose power dwarfed his completely, beings who could erase continents with effort, and explains that the fear never went away. It recalibrated. What fear meant at the start of his career was stop. What it came to mean over time and through experience was information, a signal that the situation was serious enough to demand his full attention and best judgment. Fear became the mechanism that sharpened him rather than paralyzed him, not because he conquered it, but because he learned to treat it as data rather than verdict. Midoriya's pen moves fast. In the margin he writes, "This is what All Might never said out loud." The training that develops over subsequent weeks is not a curriculum. It has no schedule, no assessment rubric, no official enrollment. It is more like a standing conversation with intermittent physical demonstrations. Krillin moving through concepts at walking speed, while students who happen to be nearby happen to watch and happen to absorb. Ida is the first to formally ask if he can be present consistently. Krillin says yes without conditions. Uraraka joins the following week. Todoroki appears one afternoon, says nothing, positions himself where he has good sightlines, and begins attending with the silent regularity of someone who has decided this matters without wanting to announce the decision the unofficials see. Scions grow without any deliberate expansion. People come because word travels, in the specific underground current of a school where students are perceptive because what is happening in those sessions cannot be fully described, but can be immediately recognized as valuable. What Krillin teaches, without calling it teaching, falls into categories that UA's official curriculum does not have good language for. The first is proportionality, the discipline of asking, before every action, how much force does this situation actually require, and how close am I to that amount? The answer is almost always less than instinct suggests, and the gap between instinct and accurate assessment is where most damage, to villains, to bystanders, to the hero themselves, tends to occur. He illustrates this through descriptions of his own failures, delivered without drama or self-pity, in the specific tone of someone who has processed grief into information. The students listening are unused to adults describing their failures as casually as their successes. The effect is quietly profound. The second category is spatial awareness, not as a tactical skill, but as a practice of attention. Krillin cannot explain key sense in terms this world's vocabulary can fully accommodate. He can demonstrate its outputs. He runs exercises where students attempt to locate him in ground beta using only sound and movement, while he navigates around them using awareness alone, and the demonstrations are unnerving enough that even Aizawa, observing from a distance he considers safe, stops pretending he is not watching. The point Krillin makes afterward is not about the technique. It is about the attention the technique requires. The disciplined, continuous act of being fully present in the physical space around you rather than inside your own strategic narrative. In a world where combat tends to happen at the quirk level, most fighters had quietly neglected the body level. Krillin's existence was a reminder that the body level was foundational. The third and most uncomfortable category is consequence. Krillin speaks about this rarely and always carefully, but it is present in every session like a low frequency running under the conversation. Every technique has consequences. Every application of power changes the state of the world in some direction. The question is not whether you can do a thing. The question is whether you have thought through what the world looks like after you do it, and whether you are prepared to live in that aftermath. This is not pacifism. Krillin is explicit about this. He has made lethal decisions in conflicts where the alternative was worse, and he carries those decisions with him, and he does not pretend otherwise. But the carrying is the point. The accountability. The refusal to treat power as something that exists in a separate moral category from the person who uses it. For students trained in a system that gave them power assessments and combat ratings and hero rankings, this framework was both simpler and considerably heavier than anything they had been handed before. Bakugo attends exactly once, from a position far enough away to maintain plausible deniability, and leaves before the session ends. He does not return. But something changes in his training over the following month that his classmates notice without commenting on: a new and genuine interest in the space between full output and effective output, in the question of what the ideal amount of force actually looks like in a given situation, rather than the maximum amount he is capable of producing. He does not acknowledge the shift, he does not attribute it to anything or anyone, but it is there, running quietly under everything he does, like a question he has decided to keep asking without ever admitting he started asking it. And in the particular economy of Katsuki Bakugo's growth, that silent, unacknowledged, persistent questioning is not a small thing. It is, in fact, the most important thing that has happened to him all year. 3 months after the Musutafu incident, All for One makes a decision that his subordinates recognize immediately as different in kind from his usual strategic moves. He does not communicate it through intermediaries or encoded instructions or the carefully layered indirection that characterizes most of his operational architecture. He communicates it directly to a small group of his most trusted lieutenants in language so plain it is almost startling. Krillin cannot be recruited, cannot be manipulated through the standard psychological leverage points: pride, resentment, fear, ambition, because he does not appear to carry those vulnerabilities in the forms the playbook requires. Cannot be neutralized through the hero system because the hero system does not own him. Cannot be ignored because his continued presence in the ecosystem produces institutional instability that compounds over time. The solution, All for One concludes, is a confrontation on terms that force the question. Not to win, to learn. The mechanism he chooses is elegant in the specific way that All for One's mechanisms tend to be elegant. It does not look like what it is until the moment when looking away is no longer an option. A coordinated series of escalating incidents, each one calibrated precisely above the threshold that hero response can comfortably manage, each one in a location that creates maximum civilian exposure, each one structured so that non-intervention produces catastrophic humanitarian cost. It is a trap built from moral logic rather than physical force. Because All for One has studied enough of Krillin's documented behavior to understand the one lever that exists, the one variable that can override the careful, measured restraint Krillin has maintained since his arrival. He will not fight for dominance, he will not fight for recognition, but he will fight without ceiling if civilians are dying, and he is the only thing that can stop it. The trap is not made of walls, it is made of consequences. The escalation runs across 5 days. Day 1 is manageable, a large villain engagement in Nagano that stretches hero response but stays within recoverable parameters. Day 2 is harder, 2 simultaneous mass casualty scenarios in Osaka that pull most available top-tier heroes away from the capital. Day 3 is when the architecture becomes visible to anyone paying close enough attention, which at this point means Aizawa, who has been tracking the pattern since Day 1, and Krillin, who identified the coordinating intelligence behind the incidents on Day 2 and has been walking through the implications with the cold, methodical patience of someone who has seen this kind of strategic pressure before. He knows what is being built. He knows what it is designed to produce. He goes anyway, on Day 4, when the scenario in central Musutafu exceeds what the available hero response can contain without significant civilian casualties. He goes because there is no version of himself that does not. Day 4 is the confrontation all for one engineered, and it is enormous by any standard this world has produced. Not in the simple sense of destructive scale, though the scale is significant, but in the sense of convergent pressure. Every major variable in the current hero ecosystem is present or represented. Top-ranked heroes managing the outer perimeter, League assets operating inside it, civilians trapped in the geometry of a crisis due, assigned to be unsolvable by conventional means, and at the center of it, the specific and deliberate presence of a threat that All for One has calibrated to be beyond what Krillin can handle with the restraint he has been choosing. Not a physical ceiling, a moral one. A situation structured so that the minimum effective response exceeds the maximum acceptable force he has been applying. It is a challenge written in the language of consequences rather than combat, and All for One knows it is the only language Krillin cannot ignore. What happens in the first 20 minutes is the most concentrated display of Krillin's capability that this world has witnessed, not because he chooses to demonstrate, because the situation eliminates the option of less. He moves between threat vectors with a speed that the Commission's tracking systems, upgraded significantly since the first incident, still cannot maintain lock-on. His Ki sense turns the chaotic multi-front battlefield into something readable in a way that gives him an informational advantage so complete it fundamentally changes the nature of every engagement he enters. Threats that would require coordinated multi-hero responses to manage conventionally are being handled in single, precise interventions before the coordination can form. The efficiency is not impressive in the way that spectacle is impressive. It is impressive in the way that watching someone do arithmetic is impressive when the numbers are large enough. A quiet building, escalating recognition of the gap between what you can do and what is being done in front of you. The moment All for One intended to be the trap's closing mechanism arrives 40 minutes in. A section of the scenario that Krillin cannot resolve without a choice. A genuine, irresolvable, morally real choice between 2 outcomes, both of which cost something permanent. It is constructed with genuine intelligence and genuine cruelty, designed by someone who understands that the most effective pressure against a disciplined person is not pain but consequence. Krillin stands in the geometry of that choice for 3 seconds. 3 seconds during which every hero watching, at the perimeter, on feeds, in the emergency coordination hub, holds their breath without fully knowing why. 3 seconds during which the calculation happening behind those calm, dark eyes is running through variables that include everything he has learned about this world. Everything he carries from the world he came from, and the specific, personal, hard-bought understanding of what it costs to make the right decision when the right decision is expensive. He uses the Destructo disc. Once. With a precision so surgical that its application resolves the impossible geometry without the collateral the scenario was designed to force. The heroes watching will analyze the clip for months and still not fully agree on how the geometry worked. How the angle was possible, how the targeting was that exact under that much pressure, how a technique that capable was held to that specific a footprint in a live crisis environment. What they will agree on is the moment after. The way Krillin stands in the aftermath with the particular quality of stillness that looks, to people trained to read combat adrenaline and victory posture, almost like grief. Not regret. He made the right call, and he knows it. But the specific heaviness of someone who has used a lethal capability in a world he was trying not to break, and D is already doing the internal accounting of what that means and what comes next. All for One, observing through remote channels, sits with the outcome for a long time. His trap produced data. The data it produced was not the data he expected. He expected to find a ceiling, a point at which Krillin's moral constraints created a hesitation that tactical exploitation could penetrate. What he found instead was something that his entire strategic architecture had no good category for. A person whose discipline and whose lethality were not in tension with each other, but were expressions of the same underlying thing. The restraint was not weakness pretending to be principle. The lethality was not power pretending to be restraint. They were the same person, operating at full integrity in both directions simultaneously. All for One closes his remote feed and does not speak for several minutes. When he does speak, what he says is not a tactical reassessment or a revised strategic order. It is 4 words, delivered quietly to no one in particular. He is not containable. And in the specific vocabulary of All for One's worldview, in which everything is either controlled, useful, or eliminated, those 4 words constitute the most significant concession he has ever made. Krillin leaves on a Tuesday morning. No announcement, no press conference, no formal goodbye delivered to institutions that never fully claimed him anyway. He tells Midoriya the evening before, quietly, directly, in the same hallway outside Ground Beta where the teaching began, and Midoriya listens without interrupting, which costs him something, because there are 17 follow-up questions forming in real time, and he suppresses all of them out of a respect that feels new and important to practice. Krillin explains that he does not know how he arrived, which means he does not know if his return is possible or permanent or something in between. He explains this without distress. The equanimity is not performance. It is the specific piece of someone who learned, in harder circumstances than this world has yet produced, that control is always partial and the only sane response is to do good work with the portion of it you actually have. The Commission receives notification through a UA administrative channel. A brief, formally worded message indicating that Krillin is withdrawing from the jurisdiction, that he is grateful for the cooperation of heroes and staff he encountered, and that he remains available to return if circumstances require it. The message contains no contact information, no forwarding address, no mechanism through which the Commission could initiate that return on their own terms. The senior director who reads it sits with it for a long time before forwarding it up the chain. What she is sitting with is not frustration exactly, though frustration is present. It is the specific, clarifying discomfort of an institution recognizing that a person operated within its jurisdiction for months, contributed measurably to its public safety outcomes, refused every formal accommodation it offered, and is now leaving on his own schedule with no leverage point the institution can apply. The system was designed to manage power. It could not manage this one. It never came close. The students learn in different ways and at different speeds, the way students always learn the things that matter most. Ida hears from Midoriya directly and responds with the careful, formal composure that is his default register for things that affect him deeply. A composure that holds for approximately 40 seconds before something shifts in his expression, and he asks, quietly, if Midoriya thinks Krillin knew how much the sessions meant. Midoriya says yes, without hesitation, and believes it. Todoroki hears through the genera. L-class channel and says nothing for the rest of the day, but that evening he trains later than anyone, running movement drills with a focus and an attention to efficiency that his classmates will notice has permanently altered his baseline. Uraraka, who heard simultaneously with Todoroki, goes back to her dorm room and reads the journal entry she wrote 3 months ago, the one about Krillin looking tired from caring that much, and does not write anything new. She does not need to. The entry was already complete. Bakugo finds out last, through no deliberate design but through the specific social architecture of someone who does not participate in general class channels with consistent attention. He finds out because he goes to the training ground at his usual time, and the particular quality of the air there is different, not physically, not measurably, but in the way that places carry the absence of recurring presences once those presences stop recurring. He trains anyway. He trains with the same intensity he always brings, the same explosive commitment to maximum output, the same refusal to give any situation less than everything he has. But there is something running underneath it now. That quiet, persistent question about the space between full output and effective output that does not leave when the training ends. It follows him back to the dormitory. It will follow him for years. That question, planted by a man he never formally acknowledged learning from, will do more to shape Katsuki Bakugo's eventual greatness than almost anything his official education produces. The Hero Commission publishes a revised framework document 6 weeks after Krillin's departure. The document is 43 pages long and addresses, in careful institutional language, the question of non-quirk-based power classification and the regulatory gaps his presence exposed. It is thorough, professionally drafted, and arrives at conclusions that are technically accurate and fundamentally insufficient. The way institutional responses to genuinely disruptive truths tend to arrive. The document does not name Krillin. It does not need to. Every person who reads it knows exactly which presence catalyzed it, and every person who reads it knows, with the quiet certainty of things that cannot be fully said in official documents, that the framework being proposed is still built on the assumption that got exposed in the first place. Power is classifiable. Power is governable. Power comes from biology, and biology can be measured, and measurement means the system maintains relevance. The document does not reckon with what happens if those assumptions are wrong. It was not written to reckon with that. It was written to survive it. The journalist who wrote the piece 3 months ago publishes a follow-up. It is shorter than the first, tighter, quieter, more precise in the way that writing becomes more precise when the writer has had time to let the argument settle into its actual shape. She does not editorialize about whether Krillin was a hero or an outsider, or a threat or a gift. She does not rank him or classify him or speculate about his power ceiling relative to the top 10. She makes one argument, in the final 3 paragraphs, that will be quoted in academic papers and hero licensing debates and underground community forums for the next decade. The system was always measuring the wrong thing, not because the system was malicious, but because it was built in the abysses sense of a counterexample. Krillin was the counterexample. He did not stay long enough to fix anything. He stayed long enough to make denial impossible. And denial, once made impossible, has a way of eventually producing change, slowly, painfully, against the resistance of every institution that built itself on the thing being denied. But eventually, the city moves forward. Hero rankings are published, villain incidents are managed, students graduate and become pros and begin climbing the ladders the system provides. The infrastructure of hero society continues to function with the same surface normalcy that complex institutions maintain long after the foundations have shifted, because the infrastructure does not feel the foundations, only the people inside it do, over time, as the effects of shifted foundations express themselves in 100 small ways that no single incident can account for. Midoriya becomes a hero. Bakugo becomes a hero. They become extraordinary by every standard this world knows how to apply, and they carry inside their extraordinary, in the permanent and unacknowledged way that formative experiences travel, the residue of a few months in the company of someone who showed them what strength looked like when it had nothing left to prove. Somewhere, in whatever direction exists between universes, in whatever geometry connects a world of quirks to a world of ki and training and battles that reshape the fabric of reality, Krillin is probably doing what Krillin does, training, thinking, existing with the same quiet discipline in whatever environment he finds himself, carrying the same losses he has always carried, in the same way he has always carried them, not as wounds, not as trophies, but as weight that has become so familiar it functions like foundation. He does not need this world to remember him. He did not come here to be remembered. He came involuntarily, and he stayed long enough to do good work. And he left without demanding that the good work come with his name attached. And that, precisely that, is the thing that hero society will spend the longest time understanding. Because a world that built itself on the visible display of power, on rankings and brands and symbols and spectacles, had been visited by someone who treated power as a private responsibility rather than a public performance, and the visit had ended. But the question it left behind had not, would never. Because true power does not always announce itself. True courage does not always need to be seen. And a man like Krillin, in a world like this, humble, lethal, restrained, and shaped by truths this civilization had not yet been asked to face, does not merely pass through. He becomes the standard everything else gets measured against long after he is gone. Tell me, after everything you have seen across these 10 chapters, do you think My Hero Academia was better for his presence, or did his arrival simply reveal that the world was never as ready as it believed itself to be? Leave your answer below, and if this kind of deep crossover breakdown is what you came here for, subscribe, because we are only getting started.